She's coming home. She's not in.
Oh, I
But
have
she's
a
coming home for a week. They have to
But yeah,
come
I
aside.
mean, talked a little bit about it.
Great.
Okay.
As a movement.
So, but yeah, he's excited to come home. Right away, she's gonna have more questions on her. This is them, any of her colleagues.
I mean,
Advisory.
Slow down.
Joints don't work like.
No.
they do.
Wow.
It is-
Not bothering me.
I drove to Illinois. And I.
Literally.
Yeah. It's a little better as we go. No,
I was gonna say, yeah, that person is. Were they in office?
Yeah.
You know, it's a blessing to first have a job like this. It's that, you know, it's not phenomenal, the whole stress, but it matters. Absolutely. Not that I'm aware.
Yeah. Ask her when she comes in. Yeah. Well, and Glenn's coming in later. He has a. Yeah. He has a Zoom right now.
Saying I should sit across from you. Pam?
Nothing. Okay. Great job.
Ready to go?
Yeah, I think we're gonna get started on. We haven't heard from Ken, so.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, old friends and new. And if you're new and you've heard everybody chatting amongst themselves, give it a year and you'll be chatting amongst yourselves too. Our chairman, Ken Lawrence, hasn't arrived yet, but it is past the hour. So we're going to ask our vice chair, Joe Cantz, to just make a couple opening remarks and then we'll move forward.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and a little bit different venue here for us, for those that have been here before on the committee, but it's a little bit noisier in the afternoon. So hopefully we can get in, and I'll just stall a little bit longer because here comes our chairman. And I know we have some new members as well this morning. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of you if we haven't met yet, and really appreciate all of you being here for what I'm sure will always be interesting discussions. Chairman?
You handled everything?
I can.
Good morning. A little bit of traffic on the turnpike coming up, but it's good to see everyone here this morning. Thank you for pinch hitting for me until I got here, and we're on both sides. So I think what we're going to do now is have our new members introduce themselves. Okay.
Yeah, there are really two things I want to do with the introductions, and it's kind of combining items 2 and 3 on our agenda. A little history of this group. When we first met, one of the things we did was we did an informal survey of the group to get a feel for what issues they felt were immediate and needed a priority look. And so in the first year or two, that's really what we focused on, looking at those priority issues and putting proposals into reports. We started with, not surprisingly, pre-canvassing. We introduced we recommended some legislation. The way we recommended it was not introduced. A modified form of pre-canvassing was adopted in the election integrity grant program that did allow for some earlier counting on election day. The pre-canvassing proposal that we made in 2021, still stands, and we haven't to date had any reason to change that. Some of the other issues are in our prior reports that we went through. Mailing list. In January, we released a report that had not mailing list, mail-in ballots. It had a number of recommendations about mail-in ballots. And our latest report talked about training for election officials. So those were some issues that we thought were important and that we should act on quickly. The first directive that we have in our authorizing statute is to look at the election law and clean it up, update it, modernize it, rewrite it. Not so much from the perspective of changing it as taking a 1937 act and a portion of the consolidated statutes and making them into one statute that does not internally conflict, that does not address issues that no longer exist. And we made a few recommendations in the reports on things like that, where court cases have changed, affected the way the statute has been read, for example, with people who were formerly incarcerated, when they can register to vote. The statute says one thing. There's a court case that says something else. Department of State website identifies all that and follows the court case directions, but that's the sort of thing where it should be fixed in statute. And so that's something that moving forward from the staff level, we're going to start trying to put that puzzle together. That's going to be a long-term project because we don't really want to do it piecemeal. It's too hard to end up with overlapping things and weird repealers and all kinds of stuff like that. So we're going to be going that way. But one of the things I wanted to do today, as we introduce our new members, is get a feel for what issues, aside from cleaning up the statute, that you feel are important and that we should be addressing sooner rather than later. And so really thinking we'll ask each of you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you think the priority issues are, give the group an opportunity to weigh in on that and respond, and then move on to the next person and take it that way. And since I'm gonna point to Ricky because he's there in my line of vision. Yes.
Ricky Santee. I'm an assistant solicitor for the County of Northampton. I'm assigned to the election division. Been doing that for the last 5 years. And I think that's why I'm here. Very interested in what this board has done. And talking about priorities, I'm certainly appreciative of this group's work on pre-canvassing from an administration perspective. All the recommendations on addressing the deadlines for voter registration for mail-in ballots, the application deadline, and giving extra time for the canvassers. That's one priority this board has already addressed that I would urge that we continue to urge our legislature to act on. But sort of from a solicitor's perspective, one area that I think I'd like this board to look at is the experience of the voter in the polling place. If I had one minor change, it would be to add a 0 behind the 10 for the canvassing, the rule against politicking outside the polling place. That most of the complaints they get in the first 2 hours on election day are people who have overzealous canvassers handing out flyers or signs they don't like. And just generally speaking, inside the enclosed space, balancing the need for watchers and those candidates and parties to see what's going on against the job election workers have to let voters vote in private so that they can vote unencumbered without interference, and looking at sort of strengthening and making it clear the rights of voters inside the polling place and outside so that they're protected. I think the laws and the court cases look at that, saying that a voter going into a polling place is sacrosanct, that they should not be interfered with, accosted, or really anyone get in the way. I think the code should be stronger on that. So that's sort of in addition to the administrative areas, which I hope we continue to revisit, that's sort of my addition. Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that issue? Christine, I saw you nodding your head.
I absolutely love that idea. 100 feet.
And actually, I'm thinking as we go around, we'll have everybody introduce themselves, but just have our new people tell us their new ideas that they want to bring to us, so we know who everybody is. So Jesse, that means you're next.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Just to follow up on maybe what Ricky was talking about for a quick moment, we have similar problems like that in Indiana County. We call it running the gauntlet, as in the voters have to come in and there's a whole bunch of people trying to give them things. One of the problems that we have is the question of, well, the 10 feet, I forget exactly, 100 feet, I forget exactly how far it is. Where does that begin? Where does that end? Is it the polling place? Is that the room where the machines are stored? Is that the building in which the machines are located? What is that? And I think that's sort of clear guidance, because my recollection is the statutory law doesn't define the polling place with as much specificity as it could. And I think that would help the local administrators, the judge of elections at each of these polling places. Where should they draw the chalk line, if you will? So I'll back up Ricky that I think we could help those local judges of elections by giving them more clear guidance. As to who I am, I'm Jesse Daniel. I'm an attorney in Indiana, Pennsylvania. I have a general practice, which involves me basically helping people draw up wills, do real estate transactions, and I engage in election law because it's fun, interesting, and a change from what I normally do. I'm an old hat. I think I've been here since the beginning of this commission or this body, and I look forward to continuing to participate and add until I can no longer, and then I will politely retire and go off and do something else. But I'm not there yet, so thank you.
All right, Pat, I'm going to step on you for a minute because I got Ken and Joe up here. So maybe I should let them introduce themselves too.
Pat, I certainly did not want to step on you. I'll let Yvonne do that. I'm Ken Lawrence. I'm chair of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners and chair of the board here as well. So welcome to our new members.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Cantz. I'm commissioner in Snyder County, just about an hour north here and along the beautiful Susquehanna River, which is our eastern border. I've been a commissioner since 2008. I've served as the chairman of the election board since that time. And I've also put a great deal of time into our elections reform committee at CCAP, which I've chaired or co-chaired since 2016. So elections was one of those things that someone asked me to get involved with. In fact, it was Commissioner Bob Thomas from Franklin County many years ago when some other former commissioners left that elections reform committee. And I said, Bob, I like elections, but I don't like it that much that I really want to be on this committee. And now it's pretty much chews up a great deal of my time. And I've learned to really be passionate about all things behind the scenes elections. So I really appreciate all of you being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Christmas. I'm the Chief Policy Officer for the Committee of 70, very strangely named organization, but we were founded in 1904 to push back against political corruption, machine politics, and try to improve elections. Incidentally, I don't think that 10-foot boundary was sufficient 100 years ago, and it's still not sufficient. So that's a good one. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike McDonald. I am the policy director here at the Department of State. I am new to the board and also fairly new in that position. I only started this spring. In my prior life, I was a litigator. I mostly did commercial and civil rights litigation at a firm in Philly, but also had a pretty robust election law, voting rights, and related issue practice. So I was able to learn about the code, about the operation of the code, the holes it has, its imperfections, and the way it impacts the lives of people who are trying to make their voice heard. So I was really happy to have this opportunity to come serve in the department, to be part of this board, and happy to get a chance to be with all of you today and to do this good, important work with you. I should say, I guess I live in Philadelphia. I was born and raised in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. So, have roots across the state. And I'm very fond of all the places that I've been able to live. As far as priorities, it's hard to choose. I think there are more immediate concerns with, looking ahead to next year's presidential elections, and if there are any areas in the code that present opportunities for people who would want to delay proceedings and make it difficult for the election to be finalized and finally resolved. All of us, I think, are probably aware that there's been reform in federal law related to the Electoral College and how Congress tabulates electoral votes. There are some stricter deadlines, tighter deadlines that trickling down have an impact on what we can do here in the state and what we could do in all the counties. And I know there are opportunities that the code presents for individuals who could take certain actions to delay certification of election, tabulation of results, and delay the process that federal law requires us to to adhere to. I'm thinking just specifically about one is the way the code allows petitions for recounts to be filed. I think those are important procedures for voters to be able to take advantage of if they have concerns with the way an election was run. But also I think there could be more better defined guidelines and limits to prevent unnecessary sort of running amok with taking advantage of that opportunity to delay the administration of the election. Looking ahead, I think some things that this board particularly could consider and weigh in on include ways we can get resources to our counties to improve the technology that's available and the equipment we have to administer elections. I know electronic poll books, for instance, are becoming more popular around the state, and supporting that technology in our counties and here in the department is something that I think we'd be interested in the department on hearing everyone's insight on. Also, and I don't have necessarily specific ideas about this, but it's very important. I respect and appreciate the role that our counties have in the process of administering elections. They serve a very important role, obviously. If there are any opportunities to give the department the ability to assist with certain logistical aspects or procedural aspects of the administration, for instance, like procurement of election materials, to the extent that maybe there are areas of the code, parts of the election administrative process where it makes sense to centralize some of those operations. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about, diminishing the authority or the purview of the counties at all. But if there is a way, the department is limited at times in assisting counties because of the limits of the authority we have to wade into sort of the day-to-day election administration. And maybe there are ways we can alleviate some of those bottlenecks such that it would make sense to have a centralized actor, contracting with vendors to procure election materials or whatever the case may be. That was longer introduction than anyone else so far. So I don't know if I set the record there, but I am happy to be here. You could tell I'm excited about election law. I like talking about it. I like hearing about it. So look forward to this. Thanks, everyone.
Because you're a litigator.
Yeah, I take up all the time that's given to me every second and then some. Thanks.
Anyway, thank you so much. If you have some more specifics on like code sections and stuff like that you've come up with or have a list, shoot them to us so that we can play with a little bit more, maybe beef it out some more to start sharing something with the group to get some feedback on ways we could work on some of that language. That would be good.
Absolutely.
And that's a reminder to the old people and news to the new people. If there's something you got that you think is relevant, get it to us. We're not editing. We're not, at least not initially. We'll take whatever you have to share, and then we'll share it appropriately with the different members of the group. And we tend not to do individual conversations. It tends to be the whole group emailing the whole group and weighing in on stuff. But the point of that little ramble, and I don't even have an excuse, I just talk a lot, is that if you have stuff and you want to share it, get it to us and we'll make sure everybody gets to see it, and we'll talk about it to whatever degree the group then decides that they want to chat about it. So, okay. Now, my law school classmate.
Yes. And direct classmate of your husband.
Yes,
I might add.
correctly.
Jenny.
Yeah, they're older than me. So let's just, make sure.
Okay. Sure. Paul Dottie, I'm an attorney in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Graduated from Dickinson with Yvonne's husband. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Exactly.
And I'd be happy to yield some of my time to Mike if he still wants to keep going. But I practice in Pottsville, and I'm currently a county solicitor in Schuylkill County, and I've served in that capacity off and on for probably longer than I choose to remember. We don't have the same sorts of issues in Schuylkill County, and I guess I'm the 9th Congressional District representative. The 9th Congressional District is very rural in nature, so we don't have the same sorts of issues that the more metropolitan areas of the state do. But we still have our share of issues, and every time you think you've seen, something new pops up. And I guess purely from and these aren't issues per se, but we frequently get quizzed on ballot curing issues. That was a big issue in our county during the last presidential election. Ballot harvesting, drop boxes, those sorts of things. We've never had canvassing issues other than in relation to ballot curing in the last presidential election. So in looking at and reading the reports delivered by the advisory board over the last couple of years, we simply don't have a lot of the same issues that the more metropolitan areas have, but we still have our share of issues. I was mentioning to Mike beforehand, we have a countywide candidate, write-in candidate that wants to use a stamper, these are the sorts of issues that you get in our county. And in fact, our election board is meeting as we speak and testing stampers and things. I only bring that up because I don't want to waste the board's time during the meeting, but I'd like to pick the brains of other county representatives to see how they handle that issue, or if they handle that issue. So I look forward to working with everybody on the board. I've reviewed the reports that have been issued. I hope at some point today we talk about the driver license registration, automatic registration issue. I don't think Schuylkill County or the 9th Congressional District has a position on that, but I'd be interested in hearing everybody's take on that issue as well, because people have contacted me about that. But I'm going to do more listening than talking today as a new kid on the block, but I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to working with everybody.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Deely, Philadelphia City Commissioner, Chairwoman. I will yield my further comments for when we get into the discussion so that we can get everybody else introduced. Thank you.
Leo is here for Senator Coleman.
Leo Nepper. I'm the proxy for Senator Jared Coleman of the 16th Senatorial District. I am also his legislative director and the executive director of the Intergovernmental Operations Committee. So election law is something that we have a great deal of interest in. Currently, Senator Coleman is in the process of working on legislation. He has significant concerns around the inability of voters to change their mind after casting a mail-in ballot, in that if you submit a mail-in ballot and it's accepted, that is the ballot that counts. You cannot change your mind between the time that it is submitted and election day. So that represents a great deal of concern for him, and we're working on a legislative proposal around that issue. One of the other issues that came up as we were looking at that was precinct size. Evidently, according to state law, precincts are to be limited to 1,200 people. There are a significant number of precincts across the state that well exceed that number by substantial margins. The largest precinct that we found had 8,500 people. So just something to keep in mind as we go through. The question is, perhaps is 1,200 people still the right number to have in law? Since it is that number currently in law, what are counties doing in order to bring themselves into compliance with that if that number does not adequately represent, given the advancements in technology, what is the correct number and should the law be changed? But for right now, there's a lot of places that are violating. So that's a significant concern.
Had no idea. That is a big one. It makes a huge difference, especially if you're in person voting. So,
One of the reasons that it came up was specifically around what would need to happen in order for in-person voting to have primacy over mail-in ballots. We would need to change how mail-in ballots are processed. So we were trying to understand what the limitations would be for mail-in ballots to be processed at precincts and polling locations. And theoretically, if you're at the 1200 mark, if you have mail-in ballots actually being processed in the same way that absentee ballots previously were processed, it wouldn't be a problem. However, when you have 2,500 plus voters at a precinct, and if you have a significant number of those submitting mail-in ballots, it becomes more of an issue. So that was just kind of a rabbit hole that we ended up going down.
yeah, it's very interesting. I'm writing notes. Nathan is here for Senator Tartaglione. And you would like to go next?
Morning, everyone. Nathan McClellan, Legislative Director for Senator Tartaglione, representing the 2nd Senatorial District in Philadelphia. Also the minority counterpart to Leo on the Intergovernmental Operations Committee. Just going to keep it short. Broadly speaking, my boss, the senator, is interested in expanding and protecting enfranchisement, achieving high turnout in all election cycles, and enabling election personnel to work efficiently and feel safe on the job. So just keep it short like that. Thanks, everyone.
Christina Icona, Delaware County. I was working with the county for a few years from 2020 to 2022 on poll worker management, poll worker education, and logistics. I am now working with the USDR digital response team, and they offer a lot of high-tech, low-tech, and low-code solutions for a lot of counties across the United States that we might be able to get into a little bit of a deeper dive with later, but I'll leave it at that. And Alan?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Toadvine, and I'm from Bucks County. An attorney in private practice, probably for almost 43 years. I just recently made a career change, and I'm now general counsel and chief administrative officer at Livingren Foundation, which is a drug and alcohol treatment facility in Salem. I'm happy to be here. I'm anxious to hear what everybody has to say. I have, I guess, not a unique perspective, but my perspective comes from actually having run a campaign for judge back in 2019. And during that campaign, it became apparent to me that there are barriers to candidates and potential candidates that are really superfluous and don't need to be there. For instance, things like your petitions for nomination and other items along those lines that I would like to see simplified and made so that anybody who wants to run has that ability. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Wake up, Steve. Introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Kramer. I'm a staff attorney with Joint State Government Commission. I work side by side with Yvonne.
In case you didn't figure it out, I'm Yvonne Hirsch. I'm the project manager for this group. Prior to this group, my election experience has basically been being a voter. So, but I've learned, it's been a steep but interesting learning curve in the last few years. I too, like Paul, am a Dickinson School of Law graduate. I will point out not the Penn State University Dickinson School of Law, but the Dickinson School of Law. And if you talk to any of us alumni of a certain age, you will know there's a difference. We're still kind of mad about that. Graham Spanier is still on my list. So anyway, class of 84, I have been with the commission as a law clerk since 1982. There's a 15-year gap in my resume where I was a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids, now ranging in ages 34 to 21, 3 of whom still live with me or call my house home base. So I think my mother was right. You never get rid of your kids. So anyway, but this has really been my only grown-up job. And I'm still here, even though I could have retired a couple years ago, because I like what we do. And I think what we do is important. And this is certainly one of the main topics that is really important to the citizens of Pennsylvania. So for me, it's an opportunity to help make sure Pennsylvania law is the best law it can be for the residents of Pennsylvania. And so my job, more micro level here, is, as Joe so succinctly put it, is herding cats. So part of it is to make sure you're nice to each other, you talk friendly, and we can find some consensus on recommendations to make to the General Assembly, because we are bipartisan, bicameral, and our goal is to make consensus recommendations. Nothing that's extreme one way or the other. If there are positions that are not part of the consensus, we'll identify them in our reports and talk about them. But our goal is to come up, if we can get this group of people to agree on a set of recommendations that would be good for the Commonwealth, then there's a greater chance that when the General Assembly gets that report, they will take that legislation and actually do something with it and be able to enact it. So, so that's kind of our perspective. That's my job. This is my boss, Glenn Pasowitz. So everybody's been introducing themselves. Glenn, you want to say hi?
Hello. It's nice to see everybody here in person. So I kind of come in late. I was at we were doing a meeting on truancy. So we're trying to something about school attendance. But anyway, welcome. It's great to be here.
Okay, I'll let you go now. I didn't warn him. I was going to call. Leo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question based on something you said. I just want to, so I can understand. You had mentioned that you're looking for consensus solutions. How do you define that? Like, what does consensus actually mean? Does that mean unanimity? Does that mean majority? Does that mean 2/3? Like, how are you looking at that?
We don't assign numbers to it. We're not going to say this is 51-49%. It's kind of loosey-goosey. It's like maybe a more towards the level of the advise and consent clause that, you know, you're aiming for more than a majority, but it doesn't have to be unanimity. So probably, honestly, if we're hitting about 2/3 of the group that seems to be in agreement, we'll produce that as a recommendation, but we will always note that this is not unanimous. And there are disagreements, and here are the specific areas of disagreement where people have other opinions. It's kind of fluid in that we'll take input from everybody. We'll go back and write and we'll discuss and we'll try to mold a group of recommendations. And then we bring it back to the group and we go back over it again and discuss it. And it can be very general. Yes, we all think orange juice is healthy for you, or it can get very specific into the actual wordsmithing of what we're writing, especially when we're writing legislation, proposed legislation. Like when we were writing the election director training provisions, we really got into the nuts and bolts of what that language would say and worked it out. But it's not simply a majority rule. We try to avoid people even thinking my side, their side. Try to keep people thinking on what's the best thing for Pennsylvania. And that's part of my job. It's like to try to help people see that when they feel very strongly about a particular issue. I have sometimes said, I think my next career, maybe I'll, join the UN and be a diplomat, because I have had enough experience getting people to talk nice to each other on various topics. I don't know, Putin might stretch my skills, but short of that, yeah, but it's hard to say, because we're really trying to get everybody to talk to each other and feel comfortable with what we're coming up with. And it may be something that is not perfect. A person may say, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's good enough to start. And one of the things we have to remember is whatever we put out there, whatever we recommend, the General Assembly is going to run with it and do things with it. And it can be amended and it changed and all kinds of things can happen to it after it leaves us. So we try to give them our best thoughts on it. And also as members of the group, if there's something that we've recommended that you're like, hey, I'm not so sure how I feel about it, there's nothing to stop any one individual member of the group to go to their representative or their senator and set forth their thoughts and say, we agreed to this, but I think this tweak is needed. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we got a note from Representative Diamond that his car broke down and he's will be here, but he'll be a little late. And he asked if we could hold off on the discussion of the date of the primary until he got here. And I'm okay with that, because a couple of issues came up in this conversation that I'd like to hear you guys talk about a little bit more. And I think one that I think we've actually talked about among the old group before was the automatic registration, because we've had motor voter since 1993 in Pennsylvania. The way it worked was when you got your driver's license, you were given the option of registering to vote. Couple of things with that. There were, and also I think, and then there was related to it was PennDOT was supposed to notify state of people's changes of addresses. And one of the things we heard about was that there was sometimes a disconnect between PennDOT and state, and stuff didn't always get to state, or it took a long time, or people would submit information and then go to their polling place and the information wouldn't be up to date. So we actually, I think, I don't think we propose any legislation because I don't think we actually decided 100% how we felt on it, but we did explore it a little bit in one of our earlier reports about different ways people have done that. And what Governor Shapiro has announced recently is that they're going to switch to the opt-out style, which is you register to you get your driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote unless you affirmatively say, no, I don't want to be registered to vote. So one, I guess the first thing is, can he do that? I think he probably can. I haven't actually looked at the statute yet, but I don't think the statute is specific enough to say the way you administer it has to be this way, but I could be wrong. Because like I said, I haven't looked at it yet. And when we did look at it, it was 2 years ago. Open it up. What are your thoughts on this switch overall as an appropriate procedure? I know when we talked about it last time, there were concerns raised that there are people who don't like their personal data being shared among agencies and that they would prefer not to be automatically registered to vote, that they would prefer to do that separately and on their own. But that's the only concern that I can recall off the top of my head that we heard from people. I see, Mike, you're grabbing the microphone, so.
I am just, if you don't mind, Yvonne, I could just clarify a little bit about what the change actually was, and that went into effect this week on September 19th. You're correct that people often refer to this as an opt-out system of automatic voter registration of motor voter, but it actually changes very little from how motor voter has operated for a long time in the Commonwealth. Instead of going through the process of applying for a driver's license or another state issued ID, and then at the end being asked if you want to also register to vote. At the beginning, the customer is told that the application will be used as a voter registration application, or that they'll be taken through the voter registration process unless they affirmatively decline to do so. And then they have an opportunity at the outset to decline to do so. Also, throughout the process at various screens, there are multiple opportunities to decide to cancel the application and stop the process of registration. So just wanted to clarify that. The data that's shared from the customer in PennDOT and from PennDOT to state and the counties is exactly the same as it was before.
And I don't know how you deal with the issue, but because I know I do it myself, 20 screens come up and you just say, you just click the button and you move on. So how much and how do you fix it? I don't know. How much are people reading and acknowledging that, or are they just clicking the next button to move on to the next thing? But that's kind of a side type question, but generally, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you putting that out there, that so that people know it's not. It's not a super change. But there's been a lot of, again, I'm trying to remember our research written about whether you're opt-in or opt-out, and that there are some concerns with that, but I can't tell them what they are off the top of my head right now. Anybody else?
I'm sorry. Paul Dottie, this is more a question than a comment. because I don't claim to be an expert on how the opt-in process worked, but how do you deal with the issue of documented immigrants who are not citizens, who can't register to vote, but can get a driver's license?
I think that's a good question for Mike.
Yes, Mike McDonald, Department of State. So it's, again, it's the same as it was before. These safeguards already existed, and the automatic voter registration change that was announced this week doesn't change anything about the process that already was in place. Applicants, customers are informed and alerted to the eligibility requirements to be a voter before they are taken through the registration process. So at the outset, they are told you're not allowed to do this. You're not eligible to register to vote if you wouldn't have been a United States citizen for 30 days preceding the election. And then they're given the opportunity to cease the process if they're not eligible to vote. And again, throughout the process, there are multiple opportunities to cancel the application, multiple times where they are informed about the eligibility requirements. And at the end, just like on any other registration application, in any other media, they will have to verify that they meet the eligibility requirements. In addition, though, PennDOT actually, when non-citizens, I don't claim to be an expert on PennDOT procedures, but my understanding is that when non-citizens are applying for a state-issued identification of some kind, they have to show documentation that proves that they are in the country legally. And then PennDOT actually puts an indicator on that individual's record that indicates that they are a non-citizen. And then that indicator on that record would prevent something like their registration application being forwarded on to state or the counties from happening. So there are sort of these technical safeguards in place too.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, prior to 2017, there were actually incidents of non-citizens being registered to vote through PennDOT, just to clarify. So hopefully that situation has been resolved. The other issue from my boss's perspective and his constituents' perspective is the manner in which this change was enacted, questioning the legality of the governor's ability to do it. Senate Bill 40, which was introduced by Senator Hughes this year, which is a reintroduction, actually provides for the Department of Transportation providing for simultaneous voter registration. So if this were something that the governor had the ability to do, why would legislation be introduced in order to accomplish it? So that's as a procedural concern.
That's something we will look into too, what the authority actually is. Yeah, I'll keep that comment to myself that I just had. So maybe we'll talk later. Joe, you were gonna.
So, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot this week. First of all, as the county commissioner, and usually chairman of the election board, not this year because I'm on the ballot, but who has a passion for seeing that all of my constituents have the ability to vote as easily as possible. The concern that I have is that this could have a very negative effect. And I use this as an example of why. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because its mother told it not to. When government tries to tell people too much, tries to force them to do too many things, my fear is that, because I've talked to a lot of people that don't vote. Why don't you vote? You have an opinion, you have thoughts about good or bad. Why don't you vote? Well, there's a million excuses why. But my concern is this is going to have a negative effect in the fact that if you're now automatically registered to vote, it's going to have the opposite effect. They're going to say, well, you know what, if they want me to vote, I'm not going to do it. There's just that, there's always a certain percentage of the population that doesn't want to do what the man or the big guy or the government wants them to do.
Oppositional defiant
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah. Well, you have kids, So that's one concern. My bigger concern, again, as administrating elections, is let's look at what we currently have. Michael, one of the things that I hear all the time from my elections office is, we just got a batch in from DMV, and is it screwed up? There always seems to be problems with, it's either lacking data or the data is not completely correct when they follow up with that constituent to find out, how did you register to vote? And that's another question I've had asked many times this week. Well, how do they affiliate with a certain party? I mean, do they want to be a member of the independent party, the squirrel party, the Democrat party, the Green party, whatever? And I don't know the answer to that, so I'm throwing that out there as well. My concern, however, is if that's marked incorrectly, it just adds more burden at the county office for what is already a limited number of staff. I mean, let's face it, since mail-in ballots, we don't have any extra people. We don't have any extra time. We don't have any extra money. And thankfully, for the grants that we've been getting from the state, but it's not nearly enough. And so again, from an administrative standpoint, my concern is that it could cause a negative effect. And I know it's going to cause a much greater workload on our very limited staff currently. And as we talk about many other issues today and in the future, all of those issues come down to personnel, which we all know is a problem, finding enough qualified people to run the elections.
Lisa?
Thank you. So actually, the issue that you mentioned, Leo, actually was my colleague, my former colleague, Al Schmidt, who is the current Secretary of the Commonwealth, who identified that issue. And he is very passionate about that, and he has testified about it. And I am sure that that is, as Mike said, that has all been worked out. And this new procedure that we have, the data is coming in the same exact way. So we shouldn't expect any problems. There's nobody more committed to making sure that that issue does not present itself than Al Schmidt. And he is our current secretary. So I'm sure he would not have lent his name to this project if he wasn't 100% assured of its safety. So I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to allow people to be registered and to get registered and become part of the process. And it really, the workload and the data on the back end is going to come through exactly the same.
Jesse?
So if I understood Michael's, explanation correctly, and thank you very much. I don't profess to be an expert on this aspect either. There is no outside verification as to whether or not someone is or isn't a citizen, as in this is purely a matter of you're told if you do this and you're not a citizen, you will be subject to criminal sanctions. But the state, the DMV, they don't go through any other process to double check this. I personally think that's a problem. But I also learned when I was studying philosophy, sometimes the question is more important than the answer, because as I sit here, I don't have an answer. As a small government conservative, I'm not a fan of there being a giant database where all these names and things are collected on people as to whether or not, who exactly isn't a citizen, things like that. So I have to admit, I'm kind of struggling here. I would like there to be some sort of outside double check beyond someone just choosing to say, yes, I'm a citizen, but I don't have a way to fix that right now other than, again, creating giant databases and lists of citizens and where they are and where they vote. And we're going to have the election boards double check that again, a central registry, things along those lines. So I would encourage the, powers that be, the people who know this issue better than I, to think of ways in order to instill confidence in the system, because immediately, and Governor Shapiro has already talked about this, in a war of words with Stephen Miller. How is it that you're going to double check this other than just people representing this is the way it is? So hopefully, I don't think we'll do it today, but hopefully we can look at it and say, is there a way that we can double check this information more than just taking people at their word? Because I don't think that's going to be enough for a lot of voters to then have confidence in the system, and that people who aren't entitled to vote aren't voting. Thank you.
I think Lisa may have a response.
Yeah, I would just like
that.
to point out that the paper application that we've used, the first question on it asks if you are a United States citizen. So.
Absolutely. But again, there's no double check. It's just the question of, are you a citizen or are you not? And I think to install confidence in the system, we would want to have some way of saying, yeah, we're doing more than just taking people at their word.
They're applying for a driver's license.
Correct, which is now turned into automatically being registered to vote unless they opt out. And if you look at all the studies, because there have been plenty of studies about opt-in, opt-out, it's a very significant change because most people who are going through the opt-in, opt-out process will do whatever that process is. At an opt-in, they're going to get in and they're not going to go through the process of saying, no, I don't want it. If it's opt-out, they're probably not going to opt in. So it is a significant change based on which way you split the hair on this issue.
Pat?
Michael, could you I might have just missed it myself, but would you be able to walk us through again, or a bit more like screen by screen, what folks are seeing? Because it still hasn't been like entirely apparent to me, what the difference is, before, where you did have to check a box, you had to push a button, and then you were taken to a voter registration application on that screen, versus now where, the folks are going to these offices to engage in a driver's related service of some sort. But, are the fields that they're using, the fields that they're completing for that driver's related transaction, is that data going directly into the is that integrated with the voter registration application? Or when they check the eligibility boxes at the outset, are they being taken to a voter registration? I mean, are they basically being taken to the online voter reg app that's been on the, that we've had for several years here, and like do that separately? So is the driver's service transaction integrated with the voter registration form, or are they separate?
It's I can look into maybe procuring some illustrations that would help illustrate the process, because my explaining it may not do justification to it, and I may not have exactly memorized screen by screen what occurs. But essentially what happens is you apply for a license, you go through that process, and then at the conclusion of that process, you're presented with a screen that says you'll now be proceeding to registering to vote unless you opt out. And then from then on, it gathers the additional information that's required as part of voter registration, which includes, for instance, giving you the option of affiliating with a political party or choosing not to, which is an issue came up earlier, that is still part of the process. So I would say, I guess, the seamless, the applications are still separate. The data that is provided as part of the driver's license application does fold into the data that becomes part of that voter registration record if the voter chooses to proceed with the registration process. But it's a fairly seamless process from one application to the next.
I just asked because, just like a lot of policies, I mean, they're kind of different versions of automatic voter registration. It wasn't clear to me from the hundreds of headlines about the change, like how many was this, like full blown, like Oregon style AVR or something a little bit different. So that was just something I was not sure about this week, but I think the screen by screen would be helpful at some point.
I actually think the seamlessness may be one of the issues for some people, that it is so seamless that maybe people aren't going to fully recognize that they're actually doing two different things. For what that's worth, that's kind of what I'm hearing. Does anybody else have anything else they want to offer on that? We're gonna we'll go back and look at that some more and bring you some more information on that. And in advance of that, if you want to look, I think it's the 2022 report. We talked about it a little bit. I don't think we did an exhaustive study of it, but there is information in there. Okay. The other issue that I think ultimately this group might want to, probably ought to propose some legislation on the provisional ballot issue that's been happening. Right now, oh, Lisa?
I just found what I was looking for. Well, Nick found it for me. So just so everybody understands, when you go to apply for a driver's license and you're a US citizen, you must provide a social security card and one of the following: a birth certificate with a raised seal, a certificate of US citizenship, a certificate of naturalization, or a valid US passport. So we're already asking a person that is there to get a driver's license for one of these documents. And the seamlessness is really not as seamless because we are also, if they're going to register to vote, they're being asked to what party they want to be registered in. We don't typically ask that of people that are just applying for a driver's license. So there are identification requirements for a person that is applying for a driver's license. So when they're in the act of applying for a driver's license, we are asking for identification.
Jesse?
I took a look at that list and I also saw that you can apply using things like utility bills. As in, when you're coming in for a driver's license, you show utility bills to say, yes, this is who I am. So I am happy that there are some restraints, and social security cards, birth certificates, excellent ways to verify these things. But I think the types of documents that can also be utilized to verify these things are a little more loosey-goosey and really don't show citizenship. They just show that you're here. And as I think we all know, there are a lot of people who are not citizens currently in the country. So that's why I'm like, hey, I don't have an answer, but I have a lot of questions, and I think I'm looking forward to working together to try to create that certainty for individuals.
We're actually asking for two separate things. The first thing that we're asking for is proof of citizenship, which is the first list that I mentioned. And the second thing that we're asking for is that you meet the residency requirements. So when you meet the resident requirements, that's when you can show your lease or your utility bills. But it is not an answer to the question, are you a US citizen?
And just for the sake of the folks that are first timers here today, Leo, to your question much earlier today, about are we always unanimous? Or one of the issues that this kind of brings to mind is, you do need a driver's license to operate a vehicle, but you don't need an identification to go and vote. That's an issue that we were obviously not unanimous on. So just FYI.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to try to explain this situation with the provisional ballots to my understanding. And if anybody thinks I haven't done it appropriately, feel free to correct me then. But what we have is what has occurred is people have submitted mail-in ballots. They've been notified by their county that the ballot was defective in some way. There was something wrong with it, so it could not be counted. They were then given information on notice and cure opportunity to be able to go in and to the county offices, get a new ballot, and or sign where they didn't sign, or date where they didn't date. Whatever was wrong with the ballot, they could go in and fix it or replace it. And that procedure, that cure procedure, was set up by the county for the mail-in ballots. The what these people did, for whatever reason, they chose not to go to the county headquarters, and maybe it was too far, and maybe it wasn't open when they needed to be open, or whatever. Instead, they went to their polling place on election day and said, I want to vote here today. My mail-in ballot was no good, so I want to vote here today. And what the county officials have done has allowed them to cast provisional ballots. But what happened in Allegheny County and in Delaware County, and we're talking maybe 20 people total. So, I mean, this is not a huge issue, but it's also every vote should count. And you want to make sure that people's votes are counted. The county then refused to count the provisional ballots. In Allegheny County, the court said the language about provisional ballots says you can only vote one ballot. So you voted 2, even though it was defective, you chose not to fix it. The provisional ballot is the second ballot. No ballot is being counted. This was the decision in Allegheny County. Allegheny County was an unpublished opinion. So my fellow members of the bar can tell you that unpublished opinions are not precedent and should not be cited as precedent. However, Delaware County Board of Elections, when they were presented with this issue, said, yeah, we think we should count them, but Allegheny County said you shouldn't because of the way the provisional ballot language is written. So we're not going to count them either. Yesterday, the opinion came out in Delaware County, and the Court of Common Pleas said, no, that's essentially stupid. We're going to reconcile those 2 provisions. We're going to do some statutory construction. We're going to look at those 2 provisions. We're going to reconcile them, and we're going to say, count those ballots, of which there were 3. But you have to count those ballots and put them in your totals. So now we have an unpublished Allegheny County opinion that says, no, you can't count those provisional ballots. If you don't cure it in the way the county offers, you're out of luck. And then you have Delaware County that has said, yeah, you don't cure it the way the county's offered. That's not the sole means of fixing it. And if you go and vote a provisional ballot, you can count the provisional ballot. So it seems to me that that's the kind of thing this group can look at and make a recommendation to clean up that language, to make it clear what happens when you have a defective mail-in ballot. Is the county established cure procedure your only option? Or is casting a provisional ballot an acceptable way to basically cure that, that situation? And the other little wrinkle on that is with a mail-in ballot, if you got the mail-in ballot and you decided you didn't want to use it, if you took the whole packet to your polling place, the judge of elections will mark it as spoiled and give you a new ballot and let you vote like everybody else. So there's a lot of weird stuff going off around there. And it seems like it's the kind of situation that's ripe for this group to look at, come to a consensus opinion on how that should be done, how that should read, do that statutory reconciliation, and propose some legislation to fix it. So now, first thing, did what I say make sense? And the people who know the cases actually know what I'm talking about? All right, Ricky.
Oh, well, I'll just say what you said makes sense. I'm familiar. I have not read the Delaware County opinion.
We can thank
but that's-
Christina who brought it to my attention.
Thank you. But I appreciate that, because I mean, provisional ballots, just generally speaking, I think that's right for this board to look at. Speaking from experience in 2020, when the mail-in ballot law was new, they didn't have the spoliation procedures. We had 1,300 provisional ballots that were counted in approximately 500 or 600 challenges. I think every county, anyone who administers a county election, they were there in 2020, remember the challenges, and that's a separate issue. But I think the board, I guess the idea is that if a qualified elector votes, puts forth a ballot. The case law, the statutes are designed to count that. And that our job as county election officials is to find a way to count that. The notice and cure, I think, is something that exists. It went on before 2019, just much more informally. And I think it's something that this board can formalize, and the provisional ballot is a good vehicle. The question I get is the law says that there are only 6 specified reasons provisional ballot shouldn't count. One of the areas that gets tripped up is that you have to sign in 2 places, the affidavit as well as the voter signature line, which trips up a lot of provisional ballots, but the law mandates that you don't count it. But the law also says that you're not allowed to, that provisional ballot doesn't count if you voted. The question is, if your mail-in ballot is rejected for a technicality, did you actually vote?
Exactly.
And I think that's language that we should clarify, because from a perspective of the voter and trying to count that vote, they didn't actually vote. They attempted, but they didn't. And I think that we should make it clear that if that vote, and the election code, I don't know if that's the definition we want to wade into, but finding some way to clarify that in the broader scheme of notice and cure proceedings, that a provisional ballot is a proper vehicle. I think that would be appropriate, knowing that there are going to be recommendations and conflicts on whether we even have notice and cure. But I think any recommendation should include provisional ballot as a vehicle, because by federal law, if someone shows up at a polling place and insists they want to vote there, despite what they're told about whether registered, whether they voted or not, we have to let them. And from the county's perspective, if the provisional ballot is the proper vehicle, let's clarify that. But that's, I appreciate the comments. I think that summarized it well. And that's, I do think this notice and cure is out there. And until the legislature or the state Supreme Court says otherwise, I think it makes sense to have a recommendation that wrap provisional balloting into an overall notice and cure process. Thank you.
I could, in case it's helpful, I could read the specific statutory provision that was at issue in these cases, because I think if the code did say, in fact, that you can't vote by provisional if you've already voted by a mail ballot, I think that would actually be a lot easier of a situation. The code's a little more ambiguous. The provision says that a provisional ballot shall not be counted if, quote, the elector's absentee ballot or mail-in ballot are timely received by a county board of elections, end quote. So I think that language, timely received, is what courts have, those 2 courts specifically have grappled with. What does that mean? Just that someone submitted the ballot and the county got it, whether it counts or not, or does it have to have been, could it not have been invalidated for any reason, right? If it's voided, does that not count? And I think cleaning it up would be helpful. I think, it's the department's position that if a ballot is voided, if a mail-in ballot is voided, that voters should be able to vote by a provisional ballot. If the mail ballot is voided for reasons unrelated to the voter's eligibility, that voters should be entitled to submit a provisional ballot and then go through that process. But I think fairly there is ambiguity in the code, and I agree that it is something that I think would be helpful to everyone if it were clarified.
Other thoughts? The yeah.
I just,
Joe, sorry.
when we get to that point of making a recommendation, I know we've talked about this, and it might have even been in one of our reports before, but I'd like to see us tie that together with the naked ballot issue. I've talked to many people even just this week about that continually. And, again, it's the voter's choice. If the voter chooses to go out of the polling location and say, I voted for so-and-so, there's really no difference when they put a naked ballot outside the secrecy envelope in that envelope, thinking that, whoever the election worker is that opens their ballot, hey, now they can see it and there's their name on the outside. That's their choice. I mean, we shouldn't penalize them because they don't care who sees how they vote. Now it's different, and we'll get into, I won't even bring it up right now. We'll go.
I want to recognize Representative Diamond, car fixed.
I'll leave that up to the expert. I'm an expert on this stuff, but not on cars.
We had everybody new and old introduce themselves and talk a little bit about why they're here. So I'm going to take a minute and let you do your elevator speech, Russ.
Sure. My name is Russ Diamond. I'm a state representative from the 102nd District in Lebanon County, currently serving my 5th term. I've been a member of the House State Government Committee, which has dealt with all the election issues, over the last confusing few years. The Speaker of the House, then Speaker of the House, Brian Cutler, made me his designee to this body. And then this year, when the majority flipped in the House, now Minority Leader Brian Cutler reappointed me. I'm glad to be part of this group. It's a great place to have conversations about things we can come to agreement on, things that we apparently disagree on. And it's a very civilized forum, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that we have a group that at least does some advanced research on issues before they become actual bills in the legislature, so that there's a little bit of background to rely on before we actually get on the floor and vote on these things or here in committee. So with that, I'll just let you continue the conversation. But if you could, at some point, Yvonne, I would like to weigh in on the automatic voter registration issue at an appropriate time. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we just finished talking about that, so we can pop back to that when we finish this little conversation. We were just talking about the provisional ballot issue and how.
Yeah, I was listening on YouTube the whole time. I was waiting for the tow truck. So
cool. That's cool.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess one question for me as we go back and look at this and is, do people feel that there should be one required notice and cure procedure, or should there be multiple ways to cure a defective ballot? Because voting the provisional ballot right now, at least in Delaware County, is an appropriate cure. Not so much in Allegheny County. So I'm thinking that's something, if we're going to talk about this, we should talk about that specifically. Is the, should there, because I don't know off the top of my head, be specific statutory language about how you do how you can cure a defective ballot? And then should that be the exclusive method? So any thoughts, Lisa?
I just wanted to add, Joe mentioned the naked ballot. I would also say we should also talk about and get in there the undated ballots.
We talked about both of those in our prior report, and we can pull that to the front and expand upon that some more as we get into this. Russ.
Sure. I did hear most of the conversation. And I agree that we need to come to some statutory resolution on this. But if we can call back to Mr. Knepper's earlier comments about Senator Coleman's concerns about people who actually change their mind, which brings up the question, what is a defective ballot? There is defective under the law, whether you don't have that date, you don't have that signature. But there may be also defective under the eyes of the voter who actually cast the ballot as well. So I think that we need to wrap that issue up in this as well, where, I mean, I would see the perfect solution to satisfy everybody would be if there's anything going on with your ballot, whether the law determines it to be defective and the Board of Elections is rejecting it, or if you, the voter, have changed your mind since you cast that mail-in ballot, why should you not be able to show up in the polling place on polling day and say, no, here is my actual ballot? And if that's a provisional, well, that's a provisional. I know that's a headache for the counties, but in every respect, we should allow people to vote their conscience and not let either small technical errors in the way they filled out their ballot or a change in the news cycle with new information prevent a voter from casting their vote as they wish on election day. So if we're going to do some sort of statutory recommendation on this issue, I think it should also include the voter who simply changes their mind and wants to vote a different way than they did 3 weeks or a month or 5 weeks earlier when they initially sent in that mail-in ballot.
I don't see anything wrong with that per se, Russ, but what about the person who goes in and votes in the morning and in person and then goes to work and sits at lunch with his buddies and they're like, and I voted for, so, well, you're an idiot. Didn't you see this, that, or the other thing? Their vote is in and done, and there's no way to change that.
Well, when you do vote in person, that ballot is put into the scanner, and that's where it becomes anonymous and we can't pull it out. And, you do have to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
And, I always know when I put that thing through the scanner, it's like, well, they can't tell my ballot from anyone else's. And I think every voter should be aware of that, is that once you drop that thing in the bucket, you're done. I think that's a pretty clear line to draw.
Yeah. Yeah, because the person who's doing the absentee and mail-in ballot, whether they've mailed it or not, it's not in the bucket until it's open, verified. And
And by
scanned.
extension, before it's actually certified, when it's in the bucket and it's certified, can I go back in and get my ballot because the day after the election, this candidate did something I didn't like? You have to draw the line somewhere.
So if it's after 7 a.m. in the morning on election day, it is absolutely too late, because now that ballot has been anonymized. It's been taken out of the envelope and there's no way to know whose it is. I philosophically, I understand what Russ is saying, and I don't disagree with the philosophical view of that. However, like you said, there has to be a line to cross. My concern with the person who mails their mail-in ballot in before election day and then changes their mind, a week before, even if it's like next year, there are going to be, even in a small county like mine, thousands and thousands and thousands of ballots to go through. And we obviously have them organized by precinct. But again, I don't know if you heard this, Russ, but we have limited staff. And so,
I understand.
in order to make sure everybody's vote is counted correctly, letting people change their minds after they voted is going to become problematic, I'm afraid.
I understand. And the General Assembly could opt to only allow you to start scanning ballots at 8 p.m. on election day. So, we've got to take all these things into consideration.
And that's the thing that was, now you can start scanning at 7 a.m. So your mail-in ballot, you come in and you say, I changed my mind. It's like, oops, well, yours has already been scanned. And so it's too late. And, just trying to think how administratively you would be able to do that. Yeah, well, there are lines, you just have to draw lines and set deadlines that are reasonable and aren't discriminatory in any way. So that's really easy to do all the time. Anyway, okay. Christina.
I think we spoke about this a little bit before when we talked about the difference between mail-in voting and voting in person. So when you vote in person, you make your decision that day, and as Russ said, you put it through the scanner and your vote is cast. When you vote by mail, if you make a mistake and your ballot, if it's naked, you may get a cure response, you may not. It varies, and we should put some legislation together that would maybe fix that. But the thing to keep in mind when you start talking about what happens in person, I've served as a poll worker for years, and I can tell you people that came in, voted, and forgot to vote on the backside of their ballot. And then they want to come back in and they say, well, we can't do that. And we can't say, oh, okay, well, you voted 2 weeks ago and now you want to change your ballot. We can't do that either. We have to have some limitations to what the voter will be able to do. I mean, we talk about making sure that voters have the will and the desire and the drive to make sure that they're going to go in and make a decision. This is all part of that. And I think it's really important to make sure that from a legislative perspective that we're not putting additional burdens on counties to be perfect and have that be the enemy of the good. So.
Lisa, and then Pat.
I basically would just agree with Christine. We can't let people change their mind. We wouldn't be able to start counting the mail ballots till Wednesday, Thursday. So, I mean, people already are complaining that it takes too long. So, I mean, a defective ballot is defined in the code as defective for whatever reasons. I mean, we could talk about that, but we can't have people changing their mind.
Pat.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to the topic that kicked this off about, whether and how provisional ballots should be used as a safeguard or even a notice and cure mechanism, which they're not. I mean, just I think it's an important kind of context here in that, of the universe of mail-in and absentee ballots that we reject, we know that a huge portion of them are missing a privacy envelope, right? And this body's talked about that. Another huge portion don't have a date. And then there's a much smaller portion that have other issues. I mean, a missing signature, right? Which of course, is absolutely essential for us to count that ballot. And then a whole bunch or a decent number coming after the deadline too. So, if the secrecy envelope and the date issues were taken off the table as fatal flaws, which this board has discussed before, we're talking about a really small number of ballots that are at risk of being rejected. And the voter does have to be responsible for following the steps and signing that envelope. Just like the voter, I think is responsible for when they have their ballot, making their choices and being confident about their choices. So, I mean, 70's report mentions notice and cure, but notice and cure processes are much more important in those states that are full blown mail-in voting states where most of the electorates cast in mail-in ballots they're matching signatures. And then, anywhere from 1 to 1.5, 1 to 2% of all ballots, 1 to 2% of, let's say in Colorado, like several million mail-in ballots cast are being flagged because the signature doesn't match, right? There are any number of reasons that a signature may match. And that's where it really is critical to notify the voter and give them a cure option. But if the date and the privacy envelope matters are taken off the table here in PA, we're really just talking about a really small number of voters. And in my view, as a policy question, to have the provisionals as an option, which I know Delaware County wanted to do, would be reasonable. So I think it seems everybody agrees we should figure out something about what the code says about how provisionals can be used. But I just wanted to clarify that, in PA right now, the main problem is with this ballot rejection, those two issues. And then, I mentioned the signature verification, which they do have in a number of other states, but those are predominantly, again, full mail-in voting states. And, our Supreme Court, looking at the code, decided 7-0 that our code doesn't allow for signature matching, at least for mail-in ballots. The in-person signatures, it does, but that would be another big policy question for this group to come back to at some point.
I just had one question. So if you have a ballot that needs to be cured and it's missing a signature, or whatever, do you just walk in and they say, here's your ballot, sign it, or do you do a whole new ballot? Yeah.
We're talking about going to
Right.
doing a provisional ballot.
Which would be a whole new ballot. But if you're just missing a
You're missing
date
a
or a
date or something.
signature, I would think, Joe, wouldn't, and like in your offices, wouldn't you just come in and put the right date or the right signature on it?
You get a whole new ballot.
Oh, you
you're-
do?
So
Okay.
the defective ballots, we know what that they're defective. They've been sorted out as defective.
Okay.
So you're going to get a whole new ballot.
So you're
You
going to
start-
spoil the old ballot and give them a new ballot. Got it.
Right. And then you don't count the provisional ballot until we make sure that there was no other
Verified it.
ballot.
Yeah.
And again, this goes back to uniformity. I don't think that process is the same in every county. I know it's not. So,
If I may, I know it's not the case in our county, and the interesting question I have because of our practice is, when are these ballots reviewed by the Election Bureau and determined to be defective? We don't do that till Election Day. I don't know what everybody else is experiencing. And if that's the case, how do you notify the voter? We had an issue in 2020 in the presidential election when one party had a computer program and was set up, and as the ballots were canvassed on election day, they were provided with information regarding those ballots that were defective, and they actually reached it. And they basically
Not-
said, get to the poll and vote provisionally.
Not every county does a notice and cure.
Right.
And that's been one of the complaints that we've heard, is that you could have forgot to put the date on your ballot in, and I do not know how these two counties work. I'm just saying off the top of my head, putting two examples, is you live in Cumberland County and you get a notice. And so you can go in a week before and fix that ballot, but you live in an adjoining, maybe you live in Perry County, and Perry County doesn't tell people that. So there's no requirement, to my knowledge, that you have to do a notice. So
It's not only that, but when are you required to review what has been mailed in
yeah,
and make the determination that it's defective?
and I don't think there's any standard for that
There
either.
isn't.
Well, I think there is a certain line that you can't cross before election day, because certain things, I mean, what is the process of receiving these ballots and preparing them for that 7 a.m.? Okay, now we can start scanning them. I mean, if you're actually looking at the ballot itself in any way, that I would consider that to be canvassing. But if you're talking about things on the envelope, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
So I think we have to clarify that as well.
Again, in our county, they don't look at the envelope until election day.
And I don't think there's anything that requires them to. I think it's the individual practice of the county.
That's right. That's all done on election day, as far as I know.
So
There's no real opportunity to cure. I mean, you could provide notice somehow, I guess.
They may be scanned in, but you're simply scanning a barcode.
Right.
You're not looking at the features of the envelope or the secrecy envelope itself. You're just scanning the barcode that says, we got this ballot back.
I'm wondering if we could future-proof this. Like, I'm thinking, like, if our job here is to try to fix things and make things the best way that they possibly could be, is there a way to, in the future, scan that envelope in, and hopefully we will not have a date, but if we do have a date, can we say, hey, there's no date, and then Sure would get a notification that there is no date, and then be able to verify and tell the voter, hey, your vote your ballot is not going to be counted because it wasn't dated.
I agree with that. From my
Like-
perspective, that's as big an issue as establishing the actual notice and cure. Because if you're not determining that the ballot is defective until a point in time where you can't realistically notify the voter, then any notice and cure provision is meaningless.
Oh, we got lots of fun stuff to work on when we get back to the office. So, thank you. I think we've been following the Delaware County case this summer, and just fortuitously, the opinion came out yesterday, which was just perfect timing for this meeting. But at this point, then, I'm going to swing back to the automatic registration and ask Russ if he would like to weigh in on that.
Sure. There's actually was a lot of great commentary on this. I would like to touch on the issue that Mr. Nepper brought up regarding the authority for the governor to do that. I think we have to have some smarter people than me look at the federal constitution, the Pennsylvania Constitution, as well as statutory law to determine whether, there's cause for action there or not. I believe that's an ongoing process that some folks are looking at. Beyond that, I do want to thank Commissioner Deely for recognizing that now Secretary Schmidt was the one who brought this to the General Assembly's attention, that non-citizens were actually registered to vote in the past. And he actually sat right here and made that testimony before the House State Government Committee. And we were very concerned about that. Since that time, PennDOT said they fixed the issue, which we took them at their word. What we didn't hear, though, and now that's then Commissioner Schmidt is now Secretary Schmidt, was how many non-citizens back then were actually registered to vote and how many of them did vote. We never got an answer from the Department of State to bring some resolution to that, even though we asked several times. But now that then Commissioner Schmidt is now Secretary Schmidt, Michael, maybe you can spread the word to him that we would like that answer as to how many registered voters that was. I do believe, look, this is a switch from opt-in to opt-out, and maybe the governor has the authority to make that switch all by himself. I know, again, there's people who are smarter in legal areas than I am who might come up with a different argument. That said, I do have some very big concerns about the disconnect between the PennDOT database and the voter registration database. As the commissioner said, when you get those in, they're a mess. And, from personal experience, 3 years ago when I got married, my wife went in to change her name on her driver's license. And at the same time, because I wanted to make sure that this system was working properly after we went through that non-citizen issue, she opted to change her last name on her voter registration. It never went through. Never went through. And in advance of the next election that came up, I said, we never got anything from the voter registration office that your name has been changed. We had better go on pavotes.org or whatever that, official voter register. And she changed it there, and it was in fact changed. So I'm concerned about the disconnect between the PennDOT voter database or the PennDOT database and the SURE system. The other question I had in mind to ask and just to put out there is that, does this give the major party an advantage? Because when you're given a choice to register under a party, are they listing? I believe there is about 530 different party affiliations that the state currently recognizes. And are we giving an advantage to the major? Look, I'm a Republican and I'm okay with that. But are we, if we're giving an advantage to Republicans, that's fine. But I don't think that should happen. So how is that being handled? What does that screen look like? Does it say, I'm predicting that it says, would you like to register Republican or probably says Democrat first, then Republican, then maybe independent or maybe non-affiliated. And then it probably has one that says other, where the person has to type in whatever affiliation. And is it going to be one of those 530 that are currently recognized? And that brings us back a little bit to the non-citizen issue as well, where then Commissioner Schmidt's testimony about those non-citizens being registered to vote, much to their dismay, because later when they became citizens, it was discovered that they were registered to vote when it was illegal for them. It was because they were there to get a driver's license or ID card or what have you. And they were just like answering questions, as you alluded to, Yvonne, when you were talking, it's like people just want to get through they don't want to be at the DMV any longer than they have had to wait. And look, PennDOT's made some improvements there. But those are my concerns about this switch. And I will also add, and I believe, Yvonne, you were at the hearing when I asked this question about the sharing of data between departments and how folks are really sensitive about that. We had the Department of State had been interfacing with other state departments to gather text or cell phone numbers and email addresses to solicit opportunities to apply for a mail-in ballot. I got a lot of complaints from that. So it's just the sharing of data people are very uncomfortable with. So going forward, look, there may be some legal challenges to this. And who knows? But I have concerns about the practical application of this for Commissioner Kantz's concerns where those files are messed up when they come from PennDOT. My own personal experience where my wife's name was not changed, even though she attempted to through PennDOT. And in the end, when you're asking someone to affiliate with a whatever party, are you giving an advantage to the major parties when you're giving them a limited screen to choose from? I just don't know how that's done. Those are my concerns about the automatic voter registration going forward. And hopefully we don't have a repeat of past mistakes. And hopefully we haven't created even more headaches. And I think a lot of the things we're going to talk to today are going to be headaches. Everything that the General Assembly does regarding elections is a headache for our counties. And it's a headache for our directors of election. And we've lost so many of those people over the last few years that I don't think we should be recommending anything or doing anything that makes their job any tougher. We're lucky to have the ones we have now, and we'd be lucky to keep them all so that they can all get more experience and more confidence. And anything we can do to avoid stressing them out, even more than we have over the last few years, would be a great thing. Thank you.
Wendy, is this a good time to break for lunch? Yeah, well, we want to talk about primaries. I don't know that we want to start that and then take a quick break. So, Mike.
Just to confirm, not to comment on all that, but to say that the representative is partly correct about the political affiliation screen, just to let everyone know. The voters are shown a screen that asks if they want to affiliate with a political party. They're presented options of Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green. They can choose not to affiliate with any party, or they can select other. And then there's a process further down the line after the process of PennDOT where they could identify another party that they want to be part of. But just clarifying a little bit your understanding of that screen.
So the recognized minor parties and major parties are actually listed. And I would even say that gives all those groups a distinct advantage at the DMV and may be cause for further legal action by someone at some point. And that concerns me.
Okay. Great conversation so far. I think this is a good little breaking point. We have a humble lunch, but it is a lunch available for everybody in the back of the room. Let's come back at 12:30 because we can still be eating cookies and talk and not, take a 2-hour lunch. There's no martinis anyway. So, and then we can come back and talk about primaries, which is a nice hefty subject that should keep us occupied for the rest of the day. So we'll take a break. 12:30, we'll reconvene. Sorry. Yeah, no, I agree with whoever wrote me this note. I agree with this. Okay. 30 minutes to 40 minutes max for lunch. And that's basically what I'm giving them, 40 minutes.